evening. Hi. Thanks for coming. My name is Steve Collins. I'm the CEO here at Matter. We have a great panel tonight of investors, which is always a topic of prime interest for entrepreneurs for obvious reasons. So excited to hear what they have to say. How many people, just first of all, have been to Matter before? Maybe I should ask who hasn't been to Matter before. All right, enough so that I'm going to at least tell you what Matter is, and the rest of you, sorry that you've probably heard it before. The premise of Matter is that really this is an unbelievably interesting, dynamic time for innovation and technology innovation in healthcare and entrepreneurship in healthcare. That there are technology drivers, there are policy drivers that are really changing the business model of healthcare and creating all of these really interesting opportunities for entrepreneurs to innovate outside the context of the existing system. But in order for them to be most effective, they need connections and insights from hospitals and from payers and from industry, from really the earliest stages of developing and building businesses, so that they are aligned around solving really meaningful problems in ways that can be ingested and adopted by the industry. So the premise of Matter, which opened in February, was that if you look around Chicago, we arguably have more healthcare assets and healthcare expertise here than anywhere else in the country, but we have never really had a community that brings it all together and makes it easy to innovate and easy for entrepreneurs to build those connections and easy for the companies here to build those relationships with entrepreneurs and accelerate the development of technologies that are going to solve meaningful problems in healthcare. We opened in February. We have 110 healthcare technology startups here. We have 50 industry partners we work very closely with to understand their innovation needs and what the opportunities are. And then we develop programs and we thread together the entrepreneurs with the existing institutions to try to, again, accelerate solutions that are going to make a meaningful difference. We are delighted to partner with Crain as our media partner and as our sponsor and underwriter and partner for tonight's event. And particularly excited that the focus is around investing, because when you ask a lot of the entrepreneurs here what one of their biggest pain points is, usually the biggest pain point number one, and sometimes number 1, 2, 3, and 4, is access to capital. So very excited to have this panel here. The moderator tonight is John Pletz, and if you don't know John, you should. He's a technology reporter for Crain. He's been with Crain for 8 years and has really, I would say, been kind of the most consistent voice for and speaking for and about the technology community in the Chicago media landscape for as long as he's been reporting, and consistently writes insightful, interesting stories about Matter. Right. Of course. Good. And other technology companies and other things that might happen to be going on as well in the technology community. So he will introduce the panel, and let's give them all a round of applause, and I'll turn it over to them.
All right, so as Steve mentioned, we've got a great panel here tonight. These are folks who not only know healthcare, they also understand healthcare investing, and more importantly, they write checks for industries. So these are people you want to hear from. So on my right is, my left, your right, Neil Bowman is Managing Director of Irish Angels, which is an early stage angel network with about 150 investors. Founded a couple of years ago. They have led 16 investments, doing about $6 million worth of deals, seed stage and Series A capital. They've invested in 2 pharma deals and are working on both diagnostic and medical device deals. So they're interested in what you're interested in. Previously, before leading Irish Angels, she worked at Nielsen and at Orbis. So it's a pleasure to have Neil here. Jan Garfinkel is the founder of Arboretum Ventures, which is a venture fund in Ann Arbor. Recently closed a new $220 million fund, so she has money to spend. Somebody you want to know. Jan helped. They founded the fund almost 15 years ago. The idea was that healthcare costs were sort of out of control and continuing to climb, and that just wasn't going to be sustainable. So 15 years later, that still sounds like a pretty good investment thesis. Before that, Jan spent about 20 years in various entrepreneurial healthcare companies. So she's not only invested, but she's also done some operating. She's a past president of the Michigan Venture Capital Association and a member of the board of directors for the National Venture Capital Association. And so next to me is Pete McNerney, who grew up here in Chicago and recently returned from the Twin Cities. Apparently likes the weather here just a little bit more than he likes it there. Pete has a great background both as an operator and an investor. So he raised 5 funds, somewhere north of about $800 million over the last couple of decades up in the Twin Cities. He was a founding partner of Thomas McNerney and Partners, as well as Coral Ventures prior to that. He also worked at the Kensington Group, and before that, he had founded a biotech company called Memtech North America. And prior to becoming an entrepreneur and launching his own company, he spent about 11 years with Baxter. So Pete has just a tremendous wealth of experience, and also has had a good opportunity to sort of see how both the healthcare IT space and life science space and medical device arenas have evolved nationally, but also has had a really good chance to see how it's evolved here in the Midwest. So the perspective is valuable. And these days, Pete is now heading up the Invention Medical Program at Northwestern. So he's passing on all the things that he's heard. There you go. I want to start out talking a little bit about sort of where we're at in terms of healthcare investing right now. Locally here in Chicago, healthcare, the amount of venture capital getting invested in healthcare is up, but healthcare is still a pretty small part of what we do. It's a little less than 20%. Nationally, it's tends to be sort of about equal with things like IT and consumer and business services. So here it's still a small part of what we do, but seems to be getting a little bigger. What are you guys seeing in that regard?
So we invest nationally, although we obviously have a specific focus on the Midwest, being in Ann Arbor. The Ann Arbor market, which I know extremely well, we've not made an investment in Chicago. We've looked at several companies, not a lot, but I'm really excited to see all of these great entrepreneurs here, by the way. And we saw 6 companies today at Matter, and I was so impressed with all of them. So I just want to say kudos to everybody here, to Steve and his team. I was really impressed. So this is awesome. When you look at sort of national trends, about 1/3 of the dollars in the venture world gets invested into healthcare. So that has stayed pretty constant. Of that 1/3, probably 60–70% of it goes to biotech pharma. It tends to take a lot more dollars to develop those companies. The other sort of 1/3 goes to healthcare IT, devices, and other things. The biggest trend in the healthcare space, and by the way, we don't do any biotech or pharma, so we do everything else in healthcare. The biggest change that we've seen is that medical device investors many of them have gone out of business. They're no longer investing in medical devices. It's gotten really hard to fund companies because it takes so much to get through the FDA, and then you still have the reimbursement battle usually, not always, but sometimes. And so it's just taken so much money that it's been really difficult for those venture funds to be successful long term. So unfortunately, the sort of venture world in the medical device area has really declined, and there's maybe only 20 firms now that will still invest in medical devices. On the flip side, healthcare IT has gotten very robust, and a lot of IT investors have moved over into healthcare IT thinking it would be very much the same, even though it's not. And so there's been a big swing over in that direction. So major trends, I would say those are the 2 things that I've seen.
Is that a good thing for us, given that we haven't had quite medical device success in some of the other real hotbeds for it? Is that an opportunity for Chicago to be?
Yes, that is the short answer. Is this, can you hear me out there? Can you hear me now? I think if you trace the history, you'll see that a lot of the healthcare I mean, there's a reason why other parts of the country really got very strong in healthcare venture investing, and that is because that's where the industries were. So if you look where the pharmaceutical industry is and where information technology industry grew up, in those areas it sort of spawned off entrepreneurs and technology. And it's awfully hard when you talk about medical devices and biopharmaceuticals, it's awfully hard to create those industries overnight. So those are industries that have been growing for many years in a very solid base. Minneapolis, Northern California, in the life sciences area, Cambridge. And the reason why I answer the question yes is that it shifts towards services, right? Out of these therapeutic, critical care medical devices, it starts to play to Chicago's strength, right? Sure, there's some pharmaceutical industry here. Sure, there's some medical device, but it's not a concentrated resources like other places. But the AMA is here, the AHA is here, Blue Cross Blue Shield, the American College of Surgeons. It's an area that knows about the delivery of healthcare, right? And that is not an easy thing to understand. And many medical device or medical technology investors really don't understand that. They focused on certain clinical areas and certain what I would call technical expertise, sort of, and not spend a lot of time thinking about who pays for it, who regulates, etc. So I think the fundamental understanding of how the system works is stronger here than most places. By the same token, there's been success in information technology here. There's been some nice companies that have done well. So marrying that knowledge of how to deliver healthcare with sort of knowledge and information technology, I think puts Chicago in a good position at this point.
Can I just add one other thing? We always, and I know I mentioned this to somebody earlier today, sorry if I'm repeating myself to that person, but we think the Midwest is great for new innovation in healthcare, primarily because the cost of developing a company in the Midwest is so much less than the coast. So in the world of healthcare, many of the exits happen in the $200 to $300 million range. And if you can develop your company for less than, let's say, $40 or $50 million, when you sell it for $200 million, that's a 5x return for those investors. The management team, the investors, everybody wins in that situation. The problem is on the coast, and we've had this happen to us, it takes about a third more dollars. So what you would raise here, let's say for $40 million, you have to raise $60 or $70 million for the same exact company in the Bay Area. And there was actually a study done in Ann Arbor that showed Ann Arbor versus San Jose, and that was the difference, a third more, and you're still selling it for the same amount. So everybody is hurt more out on the coast. So that's, we think, sort of the golden secret of the Midwest is that we can do the same thing, you know, but our rents are less, our salaries are slightly less, our vendors are more efficient, our work ethic is really hard, and the combination of all of those really does help our companies a lot. And you don't need to go to China to do that. You can come right here and do the same thing.
For bargain.
I wouldn't say a bargain, but
Not a bargain. Cheaper than
but we're reasonable.
There you go. It feels like there's more capital in the last 2, 3, 4 years here than there was maybe 5, 10 years ago. I don't know if the entrepreneurs here would agree with that, but it seems that there's more sources of it. I'm seeing more strategic venture investing from folks like Abbott and Baxter. I'm seeing some health-specific funds, which is good. I'm also seeing a lot more interest from the traditional venture funds that are also really brushing up on both space and starting to do some deals, seeing a lot of interest in both health IT and even some related technologies. So I feel like there's certainly not enough capital here, but I feel like there's more than there was. Do you have any perspective on that, Gail?
Sure. Well, for one, many venture funds have been raised in the last few months, and they're largely follow-on funds from existing investors here in Chicago. They're focusing both on healthcare IT and then other areas of tech, largely B2B SaaS. So I think there's definitely more capital here now, and those funds largely are investing in A rounds, so several $1 million, up to $5, probably no more than $10 million in a round. And then you've got some new angel investor groups as well, and we're very interested in finding more healthcare IT deals. We just haven't seen a lot of them to date. So I do think that along a number of areas of the spectrum of investment, there's definitely more opportunities here in Chicago than there have been in the past.
I think I would encourage you not to fall into the trap that the capital isn't there, woe is me, right? I think it was a reasonable position to take 20 years ago when capital was sort of focused in certain pockets, and the folks there had enough to do that they weren't all that interested in getting to the Midwest. That is not the case, right? There are a lot of very sophisticated investors. They know where Chicago is. They know how to get on an airplane. And if there is a good deal here, they will show up. So it's much better. If you're having trouble attracting an investor, obviously you need to make the effort to go find them. You need to also start looking inward a little bit. Okay, what do I need to do to improve the deal? Because I have very rarely seen a good investment opportunity go ignored. And every day I think it's information flows quicker, and Chicago is certainly not an unknown place.
What are you seeing in terms of the opportunities, the number of entrepreneurs versus when you started your fund Arboretum?
So I started Arboretum in 2002, so that's 13 years ago. And in Ann Arbor at the time, in the state of Michigan, literally at the time, there were 3 venture funds. So there were no venture funds. There were a few entrepreneurs, but really not many. I mean, by comparison to Chicago, where you have I often wondered, why aren't there spin-outs out of Baxter and out of Abbott? I mean, I would think there would be so many great management teams that could be coming out of those groups, along with then all the different associations, the terrific healthcare systems that are here. So we did not have any of that infrastructure in Michigan. I mean, the only thing that was different, we had the University of Michigan, but you've got Northwestern, you've got University of Chicago, you've got University of Illinois. I think you have a very robust environment, and it's, it takes a nascent community, which is yourselves. I mean, I don't know how many people are in here, 200 or 150, I don't know, but this is the community that will start building that. And in Ann Arbor, when I started, there were 10 of us. I mean, literally, we didn't, you would never put us in this room because we feel like there's just, it's too big a room for the small group that we were. So, but once there's some successes, that's when you start to see the community growing so much more. Because all of a sudden, there's entrepreneurs that are talking about their success stories. They're helping mentor the younger folks. When they have a success, they want to go start another company, and that's happened to us a few times now, which is absolutely fantastic. So, it takes a small group to get going, but this is a much bigger group than Michigan had when we started 12 years ago. And now we have, by the way, 40 venture funds in Michigan. Yeah. Some are really little, but some are.
The only other, I left here in 1991, 92 to go start a venture firm in Minneapolis, right? And I love Minneapolis. I really enjoyed living there, but it wasn't my goal in life to move at that point. And there's a very big difference today in the Chicago community, early stage venture community now than there was in 1991, 92. Back then, and granted this was an early time for venture, Chicago really was what I would call a big corporation town. It was really driven by large, successful corporations, and the sort of shakers and the movers, if you will, were big company people. And frankly, at the time, it really didn't need, towns in Minneapolis and Ann Arbor is just simply more important to those towns to grow those kind of industries. It was an important part of employment, an important part of the technology. I come back here now, and I think all this activity is caught the attention of the town. I think it is I think most people, certainly the politicians, have figured out, I look at Steve, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I figured out how important this is. I mean, this is the future. If we're depending on large corporations, well, you know, they get sold, some of them do well, some not do well, and I think there's a general understanding in the business community just how important it is to create this environment. It's a very big difference.
I think that's absolutely right. There's way more attention being focused on it, both from the large corporations, certainly from the leaders, both in the city and the state. You know, they just realize that where the growth is going to happen, where it's come from. The most interesting thing is, you know, you look at a place like Matter, and that sort of tells you that someone's paying attention, and instead of thinking, instead of it being overlooked, I feel like they're looking at it as an asset. They sort of took a careful look around of what Chicago has and where its opportunities are. And you know, the question will be whether or not you get a meeting of the capital and the entrepreneurs, and you really start to see sort of the volume of new companies that you've seen on the digital side, which took off quite quickly in Chicago. You know, the number of digital startups, you know, most people remember a decade ago, were not a lot of them, and now, you know, you really have seen noticeable uptick. So one of the things that Toby might be able to tell us, what are you looking for? What types of investment when it comes to healthcare, life science? What are you looking for?
Sure. So my responses are probably going to be a little bit more on the early stage side versus our other investors here. In terms of early stage healthcare investing, like I mentioned, I would love to see more healthcare IT. And the types of businesses that would really be a great fit for us, aside from, let me take a step back, Irish Angels invest in companies that have an affiliation with the university, and that can be an investor, a director, or a founder. And so if you do have an active angel investor or director, for example, that did graduate from Notre Dame, would love to talk to you. So when I first talked to healthcare IT entrepreneurs, as I would with any tech entrepreneur, just talk about, is your product complete? So that definitely has to be the case, and we like to see traction, typically in the form of revenue. Unless you have a pure B2C model, which is probably going to be pretty rare among this group, and in that case, we would look for really nice user growth month over month, and then there could be other ways in which you have substantive traction. For example, if you're partnering with really great hospital systems or universities that have top-tier programs around the country, that can really be helpful for your cause. If your management team has had successes in the past, that's also something that we look for. And so we'll kind of have that conversation initially on the healthcare IT side. If it does seem like a good fit, then we would put you through the process. Similarly, with the device diagnostic side, we would look for great teams, but we're also looking for companies that are ideally in clinical trial phase or as close as possible to the clinical trial phase, because we really want to know that there is a chance that this technology works. And it's really, as Jan mentioned, it's a lot tougher for devices and diagnostics, unfortunately, this time to get capital, because with early stage groups like ours, we know that it's a huge risk and it requires so much capital down the road that we're going to get diluted to a very small percentage by the time that you exit, that we're really going to be a little bit more cautious on the device and diagnostic side than on the IT side, because we know that it's just a lot harder for those successes to happen. So we'll kind of go a little bit more into where you're at in the exact process if you're a device or diagnostic company.
Sure. As I mentioned, we invest in everything in healthcare except for biotech and pharma. So medical devices, diagnostics, healthcare IT, healthcare services, life science tools, those would be the 5 big buckets. Our overarching theme is what John described earlier, which is we really want to find companies that drive cost out of the healthcare system, but still provide great clinical care. If it costs more, if it slows down the workflow, if it's difficult to use, it just wouldn't work for us. The other big bucket is capital efficient companies. This 40 million number that I mentioned to you before is really something that we pay a lot of attention to because we really want to make sure that we can all be successful in the normal range of exits and not have to have a super huge exit in order to be successful. We're stage agnostic, so really similar to Gail, we'll invest in any company once some of the risk have been kind of taken out of the equation. So for us, if it's on the regulated side, like a device and diagnostic, we do need a clear path to FDA approval. We really don't want to take both reimbursement risk and FDA risk. It'll take one or the other, but it's difficult to take both. On the healthcare IT tools and service side, we really want to see some revenue, so at least $1 million in revenue. We don't do seed investments. It would be hard to do a seed investment and have those other qualifications having been met. So it is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of diligence that we will spend going through looking at companies. It is quite honestly, a huge challenge to kind of get through the funnel. But we love to work with early stage healthcare companies, and so if someone can be patient with us and go through that, it'll take us several months to do the diligence. We try and invest in 3 companies a year, and we'll probably have 15 to 17 new companies in the 4th fund that we just raised.
Both of you made the switch from really large device or pharma companies. Tell me a little bit about how that sort of informed what you do as investors, what you look for.
You mean our previous operating roles?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll go first. So my experience is not really with the big, I'm a biomedical engineer and an MBA who then worked for 2 different medical device startups that basically created the world of interventional cardiology. I'm very old. And so this way back in '83, each company ended up getting bought by Eli Lilly for 100 to 150 million, which back in the 80s and 90s was a lot of money. And they basically became a big corporation called Abbott. It ended up as Abbott. It called Guidant. It then got split into both Boston Scientific and Abbott. So my experience is really with the early stage healthcare companies when I was employee number 19 at the first company. So it was in marketing, sales, and clinical research. And I just love the world of startups to me compared to the big companies. I'm sorry if there's anyone here from a big company, but in a small company, you can just have impact across so many different areas. Every person just makes such a big difference. In big companies, it becomes much more siloed. And for me, I just didn't like that environment so much. So I think the experience I had at both of these startups over those 12 years, and then I had a consulting business for 8 years before I started Arboretum, helping different venture funds do due diligence. All of those really kind of led to how we look at companies within Arboretum and how much time we spend really trying to understand the clinical need, how this new product satisfies that clinical need, how it compares to the competition, the IP, the regulatory strategy, the reimbursement strategy, how good is the management team. All of that kind of goes together from, I guess, that 20 years of experience at the startups and the consulting business.
It's a thought-provoking question. When I was at Baxter, it's kind of interesting. I started obviously at a lower level, and I was sort of moved up the energy groups, or I was in the international division a lot, sort of small areas of the world or countries. And I found that really interesting. But as happens in a big corporation, if you do well, they sort of move you up. And I sort of got to a level where I was sort of 1 or 2 steps removed from really the front line, and it just wasn't all that interesting to me. And I also, frankly, I don't think I was all that good at it either. So when I had an opportunity to sort of go and start a company, it just seemed like the right thing because that's what I like to do. And that sort of launched me into the venture world. The reason this question is, I think, really a good one is that we are often evaluating people to work in our investment small companies, and many of them come from large companies. And it is not an easy thing to predict who's been successful in a larger company, who will be successful in a smaller company. But like me, there's a lot of people out there who spend 10, 15 years in a big company, they get into their mid-30s, and they kind of look around and say, gee, I'd like to make a contribution. I'd really like to do something smaller. And it simply just, even though that's a natural instinct, it just simply doesn't suit some people, where it does suit other people. So I think we had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out who really is appropriate for this, because it's hard. You know, you have to get into the details. You have to do things yourself. Some people have the instinct to do that, other people don't.
Do you find that in, particularly in healthcare investing, that you see a lot more investors with an operating background than you might see in some other areas?
It really depends on the part of healthcare. Our firm invested for a lot of years, sort of 60-40 or 55-45 in the life sciences area. In the life sciences area, you find people who are really scientists, right, and discoverers, and you know, not a lot of folks or founders actually operating people. You get more on the device side, where it's much more of an operational, it's an engineers, and it's execution, it's operation. You do find people who have that kind of experience.
I think I see kind of three different buckets. I see physicians who've gone into the venture world, I see bankers who've gone into the venture world, and then I see operating people that have gone into the venture world. Quite honestly, I love boards that have really different backgrounds, because you know, for a company to get from point A to an exit, there are going to be so many bumps in the road. It takes so many different experiences to be successful. So I really like a lot of diversity in backgrounds at the board in order to really help the company as much as possible. I really like the independent director, though, however, to have a strong operating background. Ideally, hopefully they can, you know, a great network in that particular area of discipline, and can really help mentor the CEO. But that one more than the others, I think it's important in an operating role.
We're going to take questions, and it's still up there. So at some point along the way, I don't know if people have been checking to see if people have give you guys questions, and we'll get to them. There we go. We do have questions.
Can I ask the audience some questions?
Please. You have a mic, you can do whatever you want.
Well, I would love to know who's in the room, so raise your hand if this applies to you. Who has a healthcare IT startup? A device? Diagnostic? Therapeutic or pharma?
Life science tools. So what is everybody else? What's everybody else?
Anybody that's not starting a company that's just trying to learn about it?
CVS Health.
Snooping.
So you're investing?
We are actually. We have a startup similar to this in Boston, and you know, they're trying to create this very same environment there.
Do you have a fund?
Sorry?
Does CVS have a fund?
Yes, but focused for that startup for our own initiative.
So you're incubating.
Sorry?
You're incubating companies as
Yeah,
opposed
basically
to.
our own initiative. My initiative, internal initiative, is we should get out more and cooperate with others around the country, not try and bring people to us.
I gotta believe that's a good thing. Just, you know, I haven't seen a lot of exits, certainly haven't seen a lot of companies go through that, but I have noticed that we've got a lot more strategics who are getting much more involved much earlier. Instead of bringing your company, you know, when you're pretty much at the goal line and I can buy it, I'm seeing the companies get involved early. I hope that's helpful to the entrepreneurs. I really don't have a sense of whether it's made their life any easier, or at least more visible from where I sit.
And who's raising capital now? Who plans to raise in 6 to 9 months?
All right, so one more questions. What technology areas do you think have the most potential? Where are we going to see the most activity in the next 5 years?
I think healthcare service, which I guess Pete mentioned earlier, but so hospitals are God, to be a hospital, is anybody in the room a hospital administrator? Okay. I think that has got to be the hardest job in the world right now. They run about a 2 or 3% margin. I would have said this even if they were sitting here. But they run about a 2 or 3% margin. Their costs, they see that bundled payments are coming at them. And next year, I think this year, CMS, which is Medicare, wants 30% of all payments to be bundled, which means from diagnosis through the operation, whatever it is, through rehab is all under one payment, including the physician fees, the anesthesiologist, the equipment, whatever it is, all of that is one payment. And this hospital administrator has to figure out how to pay everybody. Next year it's going up to 50%. So they are seeing this huge wall coming at them, and they do not, they're trying to figure out, they don't even know what their costs are. They don't really have great cost accounting in the hospital. It's unbelievable. If you go to a car manufacturer in Detroit, they can tell you how much it costs to make a Toyota or a GM or whatever it is. So hospitals are under undue, incredible pressure. So one area we really see a lot of interesting companies is in this healthcare service area, really trying to improve workflow, get patients out of the hospital sooner, improve the length of stay, all of those kinds of things to help the cost go down. And it's really much more directed at healthcare service kind of opportunities than really anything else.
I would add a couple. I mean, again, our firm's pretty active in the life sciences area, and incidentally, there are many different segments of life sciences. So I think you should understand that, because certainly one segment is the development of sort of therapeutics, which has its own set of challenges, but it's a large industry that supports a lot of services to that industry. And also is undergoing a pretty big change. So in that part of our world, there's been some very good investment opportunities in a couple areas. One of them is in this sort of personalized medicine, molecular diagnostic world, where there's this desire to sort of associate disease with certain genetic markers. So that future therapies can be targeted. And it is an area that has really grown a lot recently, and certainly there's a lot of science to go, but that is the wave of the future. There's also parts of the pharma area which are what I would call specialty pharma. This is not the development of a new compound. This is typically using either existing compounds for new disease states, existing compounds delivered sort of in a different way. You also have in this area compounds that are focused on certain genetic disorders, which are sort of smaller markets, but huge value added, allowing people to live who otherwise might not. So those areas in the pharma world are, I think, interesting opportunities, and I totally agree with Jan as far as helping the system, which is undergoing big change, generate better, more useful information which to manage themselves.
The only thing that I've seen, a lot of the molecular diagnostics, as I mentioned, we haven't actually been able to touch many healthcare IT businesses, but the ones that I'm seeing are typically B2C. So if I'm a patient, I'm interacting with the doctor in some fashion via a mobile solution. So I'm seeing some of those deals as well.
What are the 3 most important questions that you ask a company when you're trying to evaluate whether to invest?
I can take that one. I mean, the first 3 questions I always ask is number 1 is what problem are you trying to solve in the marketplace? Number 2, why is your product address that need, and how is it unique? And 3, how are you going to make money? Or what's the value proposition? Or what's the business model? Those are always the first 3 questions I ask.
No others?
Oh, there's
That's it?
20 million others, but I mean, if you can articulate that, that is so key. What is the problem, how are you solving it, and how are you making money?
Yes, just let me ask a question. Where's the biggest disconnect? Where's the biggest disconnect between what you're looking for as an investor and where the entrepreneurs generally are when they come to your door? Where do you spend the most time saying, here's what I do, here's what I'm interested in, and where are they
Yeah, the hardest part, honestly, I think is, so a venture person, you know, over this past week, I think we must have seen 10 companies, okay? Today I saw 6. So it's, 10 came into Ann Arbor and presented to us. So we have a lot of breadth, and we know a little bit about a lot of different things. Unless we invested in a company, then maybe we'd have some depth, but we really don't have a lot of depth about whatever your company is. So talking to us in English in a way that we can understand is so helpful. Don't use acronyms. Don't assume we understand the science. Don't assume we understand the anatomy. So just talk to us in plain English as if you're almost talking to your kids, trying to explain a complicated situation. But, obviously we're all pretty smart and have had a lot of experiences, but it's those acronyms and assuming that someone knows something really well already when you have no clue what you're talking about. That's kind of the biggest mistake.
You can boil down what you do in a tweet. You've got me.
No, that's not necessarily true. But just talk in English. Don't talk in acronyms and science.
So I can share the 3 things that I'm looking for with all the entrepreneurs that I interact with. And it takes quite a few more questions to get to this. But I'm looking for big markets. I'm looking for product market fit that's already been somewhat established, or at least you have early indications on that. And then the third is understanding the team. I'm looking for teams that are really competent and passionate in the area that they're focusing on. And so for me, this is the most fun to uncover. In the healthcare space, as you know, especially for me, where I'm more of a general investor, and so we've only actually done a couple of healthcare deals. You are much more of an expert in what you're doing, and I'm going to ask you a ton of questions, and I'm really good at that, and I can get to the point of what's most important with your business pretty fast. And it's really easy to tell the entrepreneurs that know their stuff. You're the ones that are able to tell me exactly what you're doing and why, and if you don't have an answer, you'll tell me how you're going to get it. And you're okay with having some ambiguity, but when it comes to things like understanding how much you're going to raise, what you're going to do with that cash, who's going to be on your board, all these strategic issues, and how you're going to get to your next hurdle point where you're going to raise additional funds. If you have a really good story and you're hitting those key points really well, I definitely want to go to the next stage and continue talking to you. And that's honestly one of the things that I see most often with entrepreneurs when especially they're too early and they don't have that context around all those areas of their business that are really critical. Then unfortunately it's just going to be a response from us that we would love to stay in touch, but it's not a good fit at this time. So my biggest piece of advice is the more that you know your business and you can get that across really clearly and succinctly when you're talking with folks like us, we really want to know more.
For me, the biggest, I'm not sure disconnect is the right word, but, entrepreneurs and founders and CEOs, their strength is their weakness, right? They are passionate, knowledgeable people who are convinced that they have an idea that you can create a business around. And that's fantastic. Without that, there's no chance of success, right? But it does blind them a bit. And I think my advice, of the 3 sort of questions I said, the most important question is number 3. The person has an idea, is convinced they have a solution to it, but when you get into these business model issues and you get into a true look at the marketplace, often the companies just are very optimistic in the way they view it because they're just convinced they've got something, and if it gets to the market, everyone's going to show up. So I think it would be helpful to you to sort of get challenged by someone on that, think it through, and have your answers and the case made a little bit better on that business model value proposition issue. If you do that, I think you'll have more of a connect than a disconnect.
What areas of healthcare do you see as underinvested?
Medical devices. Just because there aren't that many venture, it's a great time to be a medical device investor because there are quite a few companies now that had investors in them. They're 8 or 10 years old. They have great clinical data, but the syndicate, meaning the investors, have run out of capital, and so they're having to recapitalize and start fresh again. But the companies are pretty mature, and so I think it's a great time to be investing in it. Quite honestly, it's just it's a difficult space. It takes a lot of money to get it all the way through to the end point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, can people hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I think medical devices is underinvested, and if I were starting a medical device company today, what I would do is go and find, as part of the syndicate, a corporate investor much earlier than was the case a number of years ago. It used to be this sort of dance between investors and corporations. Jan knows it well. We would sort of grow something, and when we were ready, we would show it to these big companies because we didn't want to restrict our alternatives. That's gone, right? Now, corporate investment early is actually a way to validate the technology. It's a way to gain expertise. In fact, these corporations now have venture groups who are much more sophisticated and do invest earlier. So I would try to put together a syndicate that included them and stay close to them, because at the end of the day, that's where your liquidity comes from. And there aren't that many of them, and you need to get them on board early.
They've really filled the hole of the venture funds going away because they had to, because they, what the big companies are really great at, sort of what I would call incremental change, a smaller catheter, whatever, something slightly better. What they're not really great at is sort of what's the next, sort of disruptive technology that's going to disrupt the ones they're currently trying to sell and improve on. That's where the startup world really is fantastic. And so they're looking for windows to see what's happening, what's going to be that disruptive technology. So that's why they have these venture arms that are really doing, sort of what's the product 5 years from now, what's the product a year from now. And thank goodness for them. I think in medical devices, they're in about 30 or 40% of the deals now that happen. It's a very large number. Yeah, it's a corporate.
Another kind of blocking tackling question here is, what are the types of milestones, either when somebody is coming to your door that make you say yes to an investment, or the type of milestone that you look for to know that this company is continuing to invest in? What are the types of milestones that investors look for? Because sometimes they're not the same ones that entrepreneurs look for as they're trying to figure out, is it working? Is this going to work? Should we keep going?
So milestones tend to be ones that I would call sort of value inflection points. So they're stages in a company where value significantly goes up. So in the world of medical devices or diagnostics, getting FDA approval, or finishing a pivotal study, or getting revenue, up to $5 or $10 million. I mean, significant jumps where the money that's going in helps that company get to FDA approval, get to $5 to $10 million in revenue. So they're really big points where, the next investors coming in or the strategic that's going to buy them will put additional value onto that company because they've really hit an important milestone for them. I would say those are kind of the biggest ones right off the top.
I would just phrase I make that same point just a little differently. You can just think of it in terms of risk reduction. Same point that Jan just made. I mean, what are the risks of developing a medical device? Let's pick on a device. Same could be true of a pharma company. There's technical risk. In the case of pharma, there's scientific risk. I mean, does the product work, right? Demonstrating that it is reliable and technically feasible is important. And then there's regulatory risk. I mean, can you get it approved in a reasonable pathway? Then there's clinical risk. Does it actually help the patient? Then who's going to pay for it, which is the reimbursement and the commercialization. So anytime you can get past those points, as Jan pointed out, you're going to get a higher valuation, and those are the ones you need to focus on.
How often is there a pivot involved in getting from where they came in the door to hitting those milestones?
100% of the time. I mean, we've invested in 32 companies. Every single company, I don't know if it's always a pivot, meaning like they make a complete right turn, but there are always bumps in the road. I mean, we have a great company actually up in Minneapolis called NextThera. It's a men's health. It's to solve BPH and prostate cancer. And I remember we invested in it. We were the Series A. We thought, the entrepreneur thought, $5 to $10 million to get FDA approval. It was going to be an easy 510K, blah, 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 blah. Well, now there's $50 million into that company, and we got 510K approval last week, 8 years later. So, it always takes more money, takes more time, and There will always be bumps in the road. That's why, going back to a point that Gail made, I think earlier, the management team is probably the most important part of the entire equation. And it's also the hardest part to evaluate, you know, unless you know the person as an investor or an entrepreneur that you've invested with before. But it's the hardest part, but I think all of us would rather have an A management team and a B product than the other way around. Because an A management team can always figure out how to handle these bumps in the road, you know, because they're always going to be there. So you just got to be able to handle them.
Well, as many companies fail because they don't adjust to the real world as fail because they have the wrong idea, right? So, I mean, pivot can mean a totally different direction, but every company is going to face decisions as they go along, and they're going to discover that the assumptions they made were wrong, and they're going to have to adjust. And the management teams just need to be able to make those pivots, and not only the management teams, but the boards. I mean, the boards need to keep their eyes open, so it's quite important.
Any litmus tests or sort of gut checks that you have when you're trying to evaluate the jockey course? When you're trying to figure out, is this a management team to back? Is this not more than the right step to? What do you look to? You look to where they came from, what they did. Where do you look most often? Is it, you know, sort of personal background, professionally, where were they? Do I know that industry? Do I know the space? Do I know the companies? What do you look to?
For me, a lot of it is, well, it's a lot of different things. Part of it will be background, obviously, but that's kind of the easy stuff. We always check a ton of references, not just the references that the CEO or the VPs give us, but we go to our own network of folks, because quite honestly, you know, the references that the CEO gives us will be someone they know is going to say good things.
What do you ask? I mean, what's your sort of question that you know that you're going to ask somebody, whether it's their reference, your reference, and say, you know, this is what I want to know?
I'll often ask for examples of, you know, why is this person a really great CEO based on their previous experiences. And I always want to hear examples. I don't want to just hear this person's a great listener and this person responds quickly. And I want to hear examples of what, you know, tough situations. There's 2 times we have stopped funding a company because we lost trust in the CEO. Horrible experiences, both of them. I hope we never have that happen again. But what really brought to light was that we came to a point where we didn't trust that CEO. And so part of the reason why we do an extensive diligence process is we want to see how that CEO is interacting with us. Are they responsive? Are they always telling us the truth? Even if they don't know the answer, it's okay, tell us you don't know, you'll go figure it out. I'd much rather hear that than someone make up something and then we find out that's not true. So when trust is lost, the whole, you know, it's done, we're over. We will not continue to invest in that company. So we need a lot of information to determine if we can trust that person, in particular that CEO and the VPs. We've gotten to the point now where we interview the VPs. We do a heart-to-heart talk with every single VP, one-on-one, saying, you know, we're investing in this company because of the integrity of the management team. We need to know we can trust you. We ask a lot of questions about how decisions are made, what happens if a problem is found, let's say in, you know, bench testing or in testing and manufacturing. If there's a problem found on the quality side, what happens with that information? Who is it communicated to? Does the board find out? I mean, we need to know that the flow of information is going to be exceptional because, again, there's always road bumps and we want to make sure that this team is going to handle it well and the board is going to handle it well. So that's where we really focus is on trust and how, you know, trying to get enough examples through our own experience or through other people's experience with the management team members to know that trust has never been broken before by one of those individuals with another team.
You know, in addition to some of these things, one of the favorite things that I recently started doing is meeting with the management team as a group. And so all the key employees I will try to meet with in person, and what I'm looking for there is, one, where is everybody adding value and how it's not just the CEO, but the other folks who are critical answering questions that we care about in our due diligence process. But I'm also looking for how you interact as a group. And so I've just been surprised by what I can learn in those scenarios, but in terms of the trust that you have for each other, the respect that you have, how you interact with each other will give me a really good indication of is the CEO somebody that can attract amazing talent? Because that is the most difficult thing with all of our companies, and it's one of the things that we struggle with. So I need to make sure that the management team is able to surround themselves with amazing people. So that's one thing that I think works really well. And the other thing, which is kind of odd, is that I like to walk through the financials with the entrepreneur. And the financials are always going to be wrong, and we know that. But what we're looking for is what are your underlying drivers and assumptions within your model? Because it's really going to help me understand how you think. And so if after we go through that model, I really believe that you understand the details of your business at a granular level, as well as strategically, how it all kind of rolls up and where you're projecting the business to go. I actually know a lot about what you're planning to do with the business. So that's another one that I just learned a lot from the Crain concept.
I just add a couple things. I think this is one issue where coming into the venture world from the operating side is an advantage, right? Because if you've been in management positions and been with teams, you sort of get a sense of, a CEO that is sort of a little bit better or worse on the management side. And I think there's some instinct involved. But the tricky part becomes if they haven't done this before, and this has happened, right, where you're looking at a company, there's a new CEO, not one who's had other startups where you can diligence, but they've just shown up from, wherever. And I think that's a little trickier. Right? The only two things I'd add to the sort of the 2 points made is number one, I like to walk through the company with the CEO and watch how they interact with the team.
Investing their money around.
I just watch the way they treat people, and I ask questions and watch the way you can tell some things. And the only other thing I'd add is attention to detail. I made this point before. CEOs of small companies have to be involved in every detail of the company. And if you start to get into your diligence and you start to watch this operate, and you see the CEO sort of one step removed and that's someone else's problem, that's a big red flag. I know that in larger corporations it's often considered micromanaging. You want CEOs to micromanage. At least I do as well.
Type A personalities need to evolve. One of the other questions we've got here, obviously, is on the electronic medical records side. Do you see much opportunity for anybody to replace Epic? Or if that battle's over and everybody else is sort of lining up to see what they can do?
I think it's going to be really hard to replace Epic or Cerner. I do see a lot of companies that are trying to layer on top. What's hard is the integration, right? Because, oh my God, the number of EMRs out there, it's not just Epic and Cerner, quite honestly. I mean, rehab's a different one, neuro will have a different one, cardiology, I mean, they're just, I don't know how many total EMRs out there, there's thousands.
800.
So, what is it?
Over 800.
Over 800, thank you. Isn't
Right.
that crazy?
Right, but actually 80% of the market is 5.
There's 5 of them?
Yep.
But so, we actually have a great little company called Arbor Metrics that can, it's in Ann Arbor, that's the name, tell a hospital administrator down to the physician level the cost and quality that physician provided in that procedure. And yeah, it's pretty amazing, but it integrates over any of the different 800 EMRs. And so, there are companies that are able to do that and layer on top, and that's where I think most of the healthcare IT in the hospitals are going.
Would that be the biggest barrier to the sort of healthcare IT innovation we're talking about? Is that the biggest barrier that the integration is tricky and that may prevent some of the innovation from actually getting in, getting accepted? Or do you think if the innovation is good enough that the hospital administrators say, let's make this work?
First of all, Epic, which has done a fabulous job and controls a lot of the market, is only in 300 or 400 accounts in the country. I mean, they are just in the really large accounts, right? So there still is an opportunity in some of the smaller institutions. Not to say that it's easy, but if your mission is to replace Epic for the top 300 hospitals, good luck to you. But if you say, hey, there's another 4,000 hospitals out there with information needs, and you start to get a little bit more granular on sort of solving individual specific problems as opposed to trying to sort of do too much. I think there is opportunity. Another thing I'd say is that if you go up a level, this whole issue of how the system is financed and how care is provided is changing, and that change is not over, right? There are a lot of chapters left in that book, and additional change is going to create additional opportunities. So I pay pretty close attention to the way various components of the Affordable Care Act roll out, whether there are changes, how the private insurance companies respond to that. This consolidation we're seeing both on the provider side, on the payer side, it just creates this churn. And if you're going to be selling information to people who manage those institutions, you need to pay attention to that so you can anticipate where they're headed.
You mentioned something interesting that after you got done with the venture side and decided to come back here, you took a detour, went to Harvard, spent a little time there, and you had an opportunity to talk to some folks who are really knowledgeable about the Affordable Care Act. And you were telling me that the ACA that we've all seen so far addresses one piece of the puzzle, but there's another one yet to come, and that's going to create some real opportunities. Maybe we spend focus on the payer side, but not nearly as much on the provider side. There's going to be some real opportunity coming along behind this.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think there's a couple of things to keep your eye on. One, the Affordable Care Act really focused primarily on coverage, right? And there were some pilot programs that were designed to reduce costs, right? And some of those have gotten some legs and some haven't. So there's a real pressure on these providers for costs, and they don't have all the answers. The second area I keep my eye on is in the Affordable Care Act is the mandates, because the payers are under really serious pressure right now. One of the reasons they're consolidating is because they've lost so much money on these individual health exchanges because they were forced to sort of quote prices long before they had any actuarial data. Now they've got the data. After 2 years, they're driving up. Prices are going up. It's not because they're greedy. It's because they've lost huge amounts of money. And some of the smaller payers just can't handle that, so they're being assimilated into the larger payers. What happens to the consumer is these payers are trying to drive down the cost. To do that, the prices they have to sort of narrow the benefits, which consumers don't like. So there's a lot of tension there that is unresolved in my mind. I don't see it as a sort of a stable, sustainable situation. I think the various elements are all going to be there. I think it needs some tuning, but the only reason I say this is, once again, is that those changes create opportunities, and just keep your eye on all that, because if you're providing services, information, you need to know.
Another health IT question we talked a lot about, there being opportunities there, specifically looking at both data analytics in the cloud. How much, when you think of the opportunities around health IT, are we looking at those sorts of areas, taking some of the technologies we've seen in other industries, really take off? How much of that's going to be applied to healthcare, and is that an area where you see a lot of opportunity for both innovation and investment?
Definitely on the analytics side, I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I mean, that's been kind of probably rising to the top over the last 3 to 4 years. Since the EMR was implemented and all this data is now available, there's been a lot more analytic kind of coming to the top.
So we're swimming in data, but we have not yet really begun to start analyzing it to
Right.
start to
Identifying the high-cost patients, things like what Arbor Metrics does. that's all, it's been happening more over the last couple of years, but that's where there's a lot of healthcare IT companies. So like we won't look at a population management company because there's probably 10,000, I don't know, that's an exaggeration, there's hundreds of them. So we don't like areas that are really competitive where there's a whole bunch of companies that have been starting because we just think that it's hard to differentiate, it's hard to pick the winner, you know, it's just not a space we're interested in. So the interesting thing for us in the healthcare IT space is finding sort of more niche markets. So I'll give you an example. We have a company actually out of New York called Rethink. That's a company, healthcare IT company focused on autism. So they have figured out how to measure autism, treat it via this whole series of probably 1,500 or 1,600 videos, track those patients. They sell this healthcare or this IT package to school systems. Now they're moving into providers. So both social workers, for parents, for people that are, you know, taking care of autistic kids. And interestingly, tons of employers are really interested in this. So Facebook, Amazon, Apple are all clients of Rethink so that they can offer it to their employers or employees to use for their kids. So we like niche markets where healthcare IT is sort of really focused on one certain patient population in that particular case.
Sounds like, you know, it's a little bit like the B2B market in traditional IT. It's not often the sexiest market around. It's where there's a lot of interest, opportunity, money to be made. There's a lot of people who get affected by autism. And to your point, that customer base is probably huge. One other thing, tell me, each of you just kind of take this, either your best investment or your worst investment, you know, which one, and sort of why, and what you sort of take away from that. Because in my experience, those sort of things are the ones that stick with you, and that's what you use to measure other opportunities, benchmark, evaluate.
I'll tell you my worst one. I lost $11 million on this thing, biggest loss I've had. It's a hearing company. It's for patients that have single-sided deafness, so they can't hear in one ear, but they can hear in the other ear. So the average age, I mean, it can happen anytime, but the average age that goes out to get treatment is in their 40s, so they're not Medicare patients, right, which is 65. And so they developed the sort of gold standard is this product called Baha, which is, it looks like, remember Jawbone that everyone used to have put the Jawbone thing in your ear and you could talk and listen from your ear? So it looks like that, but it's a post that's on the back of your skull that then sticks out about this far. You kind of look a little bit like Frankenstein because you have to shave the hair around that area, put this post in. It requires literally brain surgery. And the patient who has single-sided deafness would hear through their bone structure. So you scratch your hair and you can hear your hair moving on your skull. So this little device, Baha, would help those patients hear. So our company, which was called Sonatus, developed a technology, which was this little device that went on your back tooth on the opposite side of your deaf ear. And then you'd have what looks like a hearing aid. That's really just a microphone. It would pick up sound in that ear. It would wirelessly transmit the information to your tooth on the opposite side. And your teeth are made of bone, and so the patients could hear as if they're hearing from both ears. So their sound quality was substantially better. It cost half as much as a Baha. The patients loved it. So the reason why it was my worst investment was because it had FDA approval when we invested. We thought for sure it would get reimbursement. It was half the price of Baha. Baha was reimbursed. After we had 11 million in. There was lots of other money. I think $80 million total went into this company. CMS decided not to reimburse it because they don't cover any hearing aids, even although they do cover Baha, which explain that to me, I don't understand. But so that was our worst investment because I made a really bad decision assuming that logic would prevail, and if they covered the Baha, they would also cover this at half the price for better sound quality, and they didn't, and we had to shut the company down.
Does that affect what how you invest in?
I won't assume reimbursement risk anymore. I won't assume logic will prevail. It's just, CMS, Medicare CMS, does not care about the cost. What's happened with CMS is, because they've been told by Congress not to look at costs, what they have done now is they say they need more clinical data to approve from a reimbursement standpoint a new product. So just because you get FDA approval, they then require another trial now to prove that it is clinically relevant and reasonable to do this new procedure in a Medicare patient population, which this really wasn't for a Medicare patient population. The average age, as I said, was in their 40s. So it's a nightmare if you have to get reimbursement approval.
I'm trying to think through the.
I know, there's so many choices, aren't there?
There's too many years. On ones that didn't go well, maybe name a couple that I just tried to be instructive. One is one we invested in a continuous glucose monitoring, and there was really some neat technology on how to do this without endless calibrations. For those of you who know about glucose monitoring, there are a couple of continuous monitors out there that work well, but they have to be calibrated all the time, and it's a little bit of a hassle. And there was a really creative scientist or entrepreneur in California that had an idea on how to avoid that, or at least calibrate a lot less. And you know, the reason I bring this one up is the original idea almost worked, but you know something, if I just sort of tweak it here, tweak it there, we could get it to work, okay? And then, well, that almost worked. I mean, you know, at a certain point, this is really hard to do, a lot harder than you think. At a certain point, you say to yourself, you know something, I don't think this is ever going to work. And you have to pull out from a team who's really doing their damnedest to solve these technical problems. And we just had to accept the fact that it really wasn't going to work, and we shut down and there were two other investors, wasn't anything else. That's one type of problem you can run into. Another type of problem is we invested in a continuous a continuous blood gas monitoring. So it's just a coincidence that there's two continuous monitors, but in critical care situations, there is a need to monitor blood gases to see if the lungs recover. And it used to be take a blood sample, run to the lab, get it back, and there were clinicians interested in more continuous or more frequent. So we invested in this company. It really worked pretty well. But the problem is, and this is why I bring it up, is the world changed between the time we invested and 5 years later when we finally had it working. What happened is the labs, and for those of you who know hospitals, rather than a central lab, they brought in these stat labs. They figured out ways to take a test much more frequently and get the results rather than every half an hour or every hour. You get them every 5 minutes. And so the extra cost of using our system just wasn't worth it. And we were so focused on getting this to work and getting it into the account, we just sort of lost sight of that. And all of a sudden we're saying, why isn't anyone buying this? And we realized that. So you really do have to sort of see where the world's going and not lose sight of that. We've been fortunate to have some really good investments, and they sort of combine the two key issues for us. The team executed, the product went into the market, and the market not only was there, but it actually ended up being a lot larger than we thought, and that's when you really feel good about it.
We've only invested for the last 2.5 years, so we have no evidence of positive or negative. And yes, technically, for statistics, we should have had at least 1 or 2 failures. So I think that's probably a good sign. So I will tell you, I'll answer this in a little bit different way. Of the healthcare investments that we've done, my favorite personally is one that is extremely risky, but it's a huge market, and I'll tell you a few other things why I really like this opportunity. They've developed, or they've identified a protein which will help to basically become a homing missile that finds cancer, and so they're going to attach the cancer drug to what they've developed with their therapeutic, and then hopefully just kill the cancer cells instead of killing a bunch of tissue around it. It's kind of the high-level view of this company. And so when they came to us, we really liked the opportunity because of a few things. The management team is really strong. One of the scientists on board is probably in the top 3 guys in the country doing this type of research. And if you listen to him, he really knows his stuff. And he knows everybody that he needs to know in the space. So that's a good thing. They had a major corporation on board as a strategic investor. As you guys have already mentioned, that's really critical because they get a lot of resources. And then obviously there's a great first look when the exit opportunity arises in the future. They raised enough money and they had a really good understanding of what they were going to do with their cash from a clinical research plan perspective, which I don't always see. Especially in the medical space, a lot of times entrepreneurs tend to not raise enough money. And these guys went out and raised enough for 24 months, which is plenty of time for them to hit their next hurdle point, which we've already talked about tonight. And you don't want to end up in no man's land before you get to that next inflection point so that you can prove that you're ready for your next round of funding. And then the last piece, I'm going to go back to those financials. I think medical companies, especially on the device and the diagnostic side, you really don't know what's going to happen, and ideally the exits are going to occur before you commercialize. That'll happen in a lot of cases. But you still have to understand budgeting and where your next round of funding is going to need to come in. And so once again, this company has an amazing, just a part-time CFO. A lot of times you're at a stage in these companies here at Matter where you're not going to need a full-time CFO, but I urge you to work with somebody who really understands the financial planning side. I've seen quite a few healthcare companies get into some trouble there. So all of those issues or benefits of that company really made us believe that they could execute. And it's a cancer therapeutic that if it works, the market is huge, and they're going after all the really bad kinds of cancer. Still a huge risk, and chances are very small. But we decided to go for the investment because enough of those other pieces lined up.
Question about fitness and wearables and sort of consumer end of healthcare, churning out lots of data. It's interesting that the device companies aren't really in that space, or don't appear to be in that space yet. So you're seeing the innovation, the entry from the traditional consumer device market. Do you think those two eventually cross paths, or do we end up with sort of a Microsoft where the device companies all say, gee, we miss the internet, or we miss, in this case, we miss the wearables that produce all of the data that are going to fuel the innovation?
I think the medical companies know how to provide products for people who have problems, who have chronic illness, who are sick, right? And there's information technology being built to help sort of make sure patients stay on their treatment regime, stay on their medications, etc. When you talk about someone who's healthy, right, and you're now providing information for them to stay healthy, that is just not the area of medical device companies. That's a consumer product, right? And that's not an area that they know. So that is much better for consumer products companies. It's a different market, it's a different buying decision, it's a different dynamic. So I don't think you're going to find medical device companies wander into that space.
But I do think, I think many of the medical device companies, they have sales force that target hospitals, so that's the channel they're selling it. They're not selling, to wherever the Fitbits are sold in Target and REI at this point. So it's a completely different sales force additionally. A lot of the medical device companies, however, are building implantables that do give data either directly to the physician or directly to the patient that help them manage their meds. We were an investor in a company called CardioMEMS. There's a company here, Endologics. No, that's the different one. What? Endotronics, thank you. Sorry, Endologics is a urology company. That's doing something very, very similar to what CardioMEMS does, but it's a little pressure sensor you put in the heart, you wave a wand over it, and it can tell you what's happening to the pressure in your heart. You can then take medications to lower that pressure. So I think the medical device companies are getting into that, but it's for, as Pete said, chronically ill patients, not sort of healthy patients.
Who wins the battle for the data? Ultimately, who becomes the primary conduit if the payer and the provider and the patient are all about data?
I think it should be the patient personally, but I don't know. I don't know.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it.